Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a long overview, knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Spyderco Military 2, now upgraded with the compression lock. When I unboxed this knife, I mistakenly said that the original version had a lock back or back lock, and you guys corrected me and reminded me that it was in fact a liner lock. So sorry about that, but this one has a superior compression lock, which is something that they should have done literally 10 years ago. I have no idea. It's like this knife like traveled through time. It's crazy. But as someone who started off as a not a fan of Spyderco knives at all, because I hated how they looked, as is the case with many of you, turning into somebody who loves Spyderco knives, this was a fun one for me. I did enjoy carrying this, but I do have some complaints. Thanks so much to River's Edge Cutlery for sending this in. This will end up as a giveaway knife. I'll be giving this away on a live stream, which is usually something that takes place on Friday evenings at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. But yeah, this will end up as a giveaway item. So thanks so much to River's Edge Cutlery for sending this in. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. I will link this knife right down in the description. It is available. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's up to you. Let's measure it. It's huge. Pocket sword, Spyderco, crazy big old thing. The overall length is 9.5 inches. Blade length is coming in at 4 inches, and your cutting edge, thanks to that Spyderco choil, is about 3.5 inches. I gotta point this out. This knife does not carry at all like a huge knife. Out of all the really big, like if it's over 9 inches, I'm gonna call that an XL folding knife. You can define that however you want. But out of all the knives that I've carried that are truly XL folding knives, this was one of the easiest carries, like one of the easiest experiences. It really doesn't feel that big, but it's still apparent that you're carrying a large knife. Let's do some size comparisons. Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and Other. So up against the 8010 and the 80-20.5, where are you? We're going to use this one here today. Huge! Look at it up against the 8010. It's obviously nowhere near as robust, but yeah, this is a big, like a long knife. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? This knife is, you know, I'm going to go into detail, but the gist of this review is that this is essentially like carrying a huge PM2, but it's not that different. I'm going to show you, I don't normally do this in a size comparison, but the difference between these two folded up, like this is bigger, but not that much bigger and not that much heavier. I've got, you know, the aftermarket scales on the PM2 and Para 3 here, but the biggest difference is obviously between this and the Para 3. Between this and the PM2, yeah, it's bigger, but it's not like, oh my gosh, it's immediately apparent. Like if somebody somehow managed to pickpocket this out and replace it, Elder Scrolls style, with this, I'm not sure that I would notice until it was fully deployed. And I'm being honest. That's something that I picked up on in my short carry experience with this guy, is it just doesn't feel that much different, I guess. Let's go ahead and put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca, which is right there. Okay, so how's the action on this guy? It's a huge PM2. If you have ever manipulated the Spyderco compression lock, this is actually a very pleasant experience. Spyderco knives are the knives that taught me to reverse flick. In fact, it was the PM2 over, it must have been 12 years ago that taught me that. And the PM2 is kind of, in my opinion, it's the king of the reverse flickable knives. Because this is a longer blade, and honestly, I don't think it's a thicker blade. We'll measure. I think it's about 140 thousandths, just like the PM2. It is a little bit heavier, and because of where your hands naturally fall when you go to like position yourself for the reverse flick, I find this to be a little more satisfying. Easier to manipulate? I don't know, it's probably about the same, but the satisfaction of deployment, a little bit more there. I don't know. It feels exactly right. This did develop a slight amount of lock stick that was not present when I bought it. Now, if you've bought a lot of Spyderco knives, like me, you'll know that sometimes they have lock stick out of the box, and sometimes they don't. If they don't, Either way, it can get worse for a little bit and then get better. It can get better for a little bit, then get worse. Eventually, over a long period of time, it clears itself. I have handled and used and collected it. I've had so many Spyderco compression lock knives. All of them have, and I'm talking about the compression lock specifically, not the frame lock Python, which has the worst log stick of anything in my collection. All of these knives over some long period of time have cleared themselves of lock stick, right? So this, on a scale of 1 to 10 for, annoyance, I guess, I'd give it like a 2. It's like nothing. I don't really notice it. Eventually it'll go away, right? But it is locking up solid. So yeah, these run on phosphor bronze washers, and the action is very, very smooth. These are very, very easy to manipulate. And these new ones here, a lot of the new Spydercos that I've handled, which isn't very many, a lot of the Spydercos in this channel have come from a long time ago. These are solid. Like, there's no blade play or anything like that, so, I'm happy. Your experience may vary, right? Especially if you're buying your Spyderco knives off of Amazon. I know it's tempting because they cost a little less. So here's something that I looked into, and it turned out to be true. There is no guarantee that the Spyderco knife that you bought on Amazon for a $20 discount is actually an authentic Spyderco. Oftentimes with the dealers that operate on Amazon, sometimes you get, it's really hard for Spyderco to monitor all of the different knives that come through, those sites, and some of them are not, or some of those sellers on Amazon, some of them are not authorized retailers, or are just sort of in between people, and sometimes you get clones mixed in. Or you get counterfeits mixed in. That is actually very, very common. So before you take that very tempting $20 discount on Amazon, just know that factually, you could get a fake one. It's best to check on Spyderco's official website and find out who is an official retailer, somebody who is authorized to sell these things, like River's Edge Cutlery. Of course, there's a bunch of others like Blade HQ, DLT Trading, et cetera, et cetera. But that's where you want to buy, right? Now, if you're okay with risking it, well, there you go. It might just be worth it to some people, but that's entirely up to you. But anyways, the action of these authentic Spydercos feel really, really great. And the fit and finish on this guy looks really nice. Of course, River's Edge Cutlery could have selected a perfect one for me, but this does look good. Action's good. Let's go ahead and do carry profile. Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a little bit thinner. That's weird. Is it really? No, it's exactly the same. I was going to say, it should be exactly the same. I know these are aftermarket scales, but they're the same thickness as the stock scale. So it should be about the same, which feels appropriate on a larger knife like this. This would be way more comfortable if they would just contour it. I don't know why Spyderco's like, no, flat G10, right? Just contour it. It would make it so much more comfortable and definitely more expensive. That would suck. But anyways, let's do length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. We kind of already looked at this. Again, yes, it's bigger. I'm not saying it's not bigger. It's just not that much more titanic than the PM2. Like, you'll notice it, but it's a much less insane difference than you might think. There's a huge difference between these two, and carry height is about the same. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools as per usual. My tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use in the channel. We had somebody in the comments saying that their screws stripped on a Spyderco knife, and somebody suggested that they may have purchased a fake, which that certainly could be the case. But in my experience, I have never stripped a Spyderco screw. I don't think that these, like their body screws, are the highest quality. And I think a lot of those complaints are from a time when Spyderco was adding red Loctite to their knives. And in that case, I think definitely people were stripping screws. But for example, I just took the pocket clip off of mine before I carried it, and I flipped it because these come tipped down from the factory, right? Which I'm not going to carry tip down. I carry tip up. I switched these out, no problem. It was perfectly fine. So number one, make sure you're using exactly the right size Torx bit. I think a lot of those, like if you're worried you're going to strip the screws, I think a lot of those complaints came from a time where Spyderco was using red Loctite, and they don't do that anymore. Just, be careful and make sure you're all the way in there before you start cranking on it. My word choice there is awful. The pivot here on this guy is actually a T15. So So we have T15, and then I think the rest of these body screws are going to be a T8. There's one other element that makes this guy very frustrating to take apart. Anybody who's ever taken apart one of these types of Spydercos knows. And that's the lanyard barrel. Man, these things suck. They're lipped over, unless they've changed this, which I very much doubt it. These are lipped over, and it makes them really hard, and you have to work at it and wiggle at it. You don't want to pry them apart because you'll mess the scales up, right? These lanyard barrels, man, they make that so hard. My suggestion for Spyderco is get rid of this crap, because there's like 7 people left on Earth that still attach lanyards to their pocket knives, and there's just not that much of a reason to. I mean, I understand, like, for some people that does make it a little more convenient, but you could just change the lanyard hole to a hole. Just give us another standoff and put a hole in the scale instead of the barrel itself. I just don't understand that. It makes no sense to me. Like, this is this combination standoff and barrel that makes it super frustrating if you want to customize the knife and change the scales out. Of course, you don't have to remove these if you're trying to just disassemble it and do a little maintenance, right? You can just sort of scissor them out and then put it back together. You're fine. But it is very irritating for people wanting to modify these. So this, to me, is one of the most ancient things, and it serves, the only purpose that it serves for the vast majority of people is frustration. For the 7 or 8 people left on Earth who use lanyards, it's a hole for lanyards, right? So that's irritating. But the knife is very simple to take apart and put back together. As long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Let's go ahead and measure that blade stock thickness and see where we're at. My guess is 140 thousandths. I think that's what the PM2 is. 144 thousandths, 143 thousandths. A lot of people complain about the thickness. You know, they call these blades too thick. I've carried thin blades, thick blades. Spyderco has really great geometry. They have an incredible flat grind. And while, you know, to somebody who's like obsessed with the ultra precision of like a laser thin edge, they're going to be a little bit nose in the air about this, but Spyderco knives in general have very, very good cutting geometry, and they, you know, are a great example of why a hollow ground blade is not always superior to a flat ground blade. I mean, these perform extremely well and still have a little bit of strength behind the edge, depending on what you compare it to. Not a lot of the tip for these PM2, Para 3, and Military 2, you know, style knives, this sort of elongated clip point. Not a lot of strength at the tip, but they do cut very, very well. So is 143 to 145 thousandths kind of on the thicker side as far as the average pocket knife? Yeah, but when you cut with this, you go, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. In fact, this is one of the more pleasant experiences I've had with a pocket knife, cutting things like cardboard and, you know, just typical stuff you're going to cut with a knife. So, but anyways, let's weigh it. Where's the scale? There it is. I'm going to guess... You know, what does the typical PM2 weigh? Like 3.5 ounces, something like that? I'm going to guess this weighs, it's got to be over 4. 4.5? 4.3. Not bad. Considering it's got a 4-inch blade, it's actually really good in the ratio department here. It's a little bit back, a little ways back from the pivot. Not too, well, yeah, it is actually. The balance is pretty far back. Boy, it doesn't feel that heavy. Maybe I'm thrown off by the length of blade. Spydercos tend to have larger handles, like the blade to handle ratio is definitely in favor of the handle, so maybe that's why the balance is so far back and doesn't feel bad. So yeah, choked up, the weight's definitely in the back of it. So anyways, meat and potatoes time. The biggest difference here between this and the PM2 from my perspective is obviously it's bigger and longer, but it is ergonomically more comfortable both in the standard grip and the choked up grip. Why is that? Because the pocket clip is exactly the same size as it is on the PM2 and the Para 3. And on the PM2, it's way into the middle of your hand because of the length of the handle. So it's less comfortable here and it's okay here. It's really bad on the Para 3, which I mean, this clip sucks on the Para 3, mainly because they have to put it below the lanyard barrel. On the PM2 and the Military 2, they put it beside it, right? Saving you a little bit, but on this guy, they put it below it. So it's way in here. You have this huge chunk. It's essentially a shallow carry position, which nobody likes, right? Okay, like 3 people like it, but they're wrong. Nobody wants a shallow carry, right? This moves this clip back, which is not the best pocket clip. I used to love this pocket clip until because I was carrying the PM2 and Para 3 a lot years and years and years ago before I was reviewing knives on YouTube. And I started to realize that I hated it, number one, after using the PM2 for a long period of time in the standard grip, realizing that bill's going right in my hand. It doesn't feel good. And number two, that sort of drop and lip over would get caught on stuff. Because it's a steel clip, it would bend out. And I had to call Spyderco on more than one occasion saying, can you send me another clip? This bent out again. And that's where I came to really hate stamped steel clips and clips that were too long and had too much of a bill, with like a hook at the end. I like shorter titanium clips that are much more shallow and don't come up and over, just slightly up. They're way less likely to catch on stuff. And if they do, they're way more forgiving. So my suggestion is, even though you're already spending a lot of money on this knife, get an MXG deep carry clip or something that's got a little bit more shallow bill and is shorter, and just get rid of this clip. It's worth the $20 that you'll probably spend on the pocket clip, and your carry experience will probably be better overall. In and out of the pocket, it's going to have some friction because these come with the peel ply textured scales. The Spyderco peel ply texturing was the first texturing to fray up multiple pairs of pants. My work pants, back when I worked at the dealership, multiple jeans. I mean, they were all like the Spyderco that I was dedicated to at the time was the PM2. Man, that thing shredded my pockets, but at the same time, it kind of wore down a little bit. So it wasn't doing it quite as much, but it definitely will, right? And this experience was very familiar to me carrying this knife. I was like, man, if I was dedicated to the military too, it would destroy my pockets. And it will, right? Cutting with this, it was a lot like cutting with the PM2. It was just longer, right? I enjoy it. I enjoy this blade shape. Not everybody loves how it looks aesthetically, and truthfully, I don't think that Spyderco knives are good looking. I think the PM2 is one of the ugliest folding knives on the market, but it works. It's an incredible cutting tool. It's so convenient. My hands and my fingers are so in tune with Spyderco knives. I just feel like the combination of the opening hole with the compression lock is still one of the easiest and friendliest to manipulate. And that's what won me over with these knives, is I realized I want a good functional tool, but I really want it to just be convenient, right? When I'm not trying to get it out and ooh and ah over it, I want it to just cut and do what I want it to do. The Spyderco knives will do that, right? Now, these are not, there's so many people, God, if you show a Spyderco knife on TikTok, the amount of comments you get, you'll hear stuff like, Spyderco knives are crap. I always break the tips. Listen, if you're breaking the tip of any knife, you're using it wrong. If you're breaking the tip, right? Because what you would have to do to break the tip is something that you shouldn't be using a knife for, period, right? If you have a knife that you can use the way that however you're using it, and the tip's not breaking, that doesn't make that knife superior. It means that your knowledge of what you should and should not be using knives for is just limited. You should be using a different tool for those types of tasks. A Spyderco knife, or knives in general for the most part, especially folding knives, are meant to cut, believe it or not, and puncture materials that are substantially softer than the blade. You will never break the tip of this knife if you're using it for exactly what it's meant to be used for. That being said, these are especially thin tips, right? So you do have to kind of watch it. If you bump it, it's also a hard blade, right? Spyderco knives, a lot of people think that the sign of it, that's another thing that I hear a lot on TikTok. Spyderco blades are terrible. They're so brittle. They just snap them in. Yeah, it's because they're hard. The hardness of the blade, a lot of people, think if they can pry with a blade and it doesn't shatter, that means it's a high quality metal. Actually, oftentimes it ends up being, a super duper inexpensive and basic composition. There's very little, if any, heat treat involved. So you end up with an incredibly soft blade that won't shatter because it basically can't. It'll bend before anything else. That's fine, I guess, if you need your blade to be a whole bunch of different tools, right? If you don't mind just carrying around a dull slab of metal in your pocket, you call a knife, and you use it to pound rocks into the ground like an idiot. I'm going to make a lot of people mad with this, but it's true. Then great. You don't have a high-quality tool. You just have a dull piece of metal that can barely do anything, let alone cut, because it's dull, right? A Spyderco knife is meant to cut and cut continuously, so while S30V is nothing new, it's actually a really, really great composition for knives, especially when heat treated correctly. And guess what? Spyderco knives tend to be heat treated on the higher side. So Spyderco's S30V in particular, combined with very good cutting geometry, makes this a superior cutting tool to many, many pocket knives that are available, period, right? If you're using it to cut and cut continuously, it will do that, and it will do that really, really well, right? But yes, they are hard intentionally, right? This is a powder metallurgy, and it's been heat treated properly the way that this composition should be. So if you try to pry with a properly heated S30V blade, especially a Spyderco blade that's got an aggressive taper and a thin tip, well, yeah, of course it'll shatter. Of course. It's not Spyderco going, whoops, guess we made a bad blade. That's just people not using tools correctly. But yeah, this will perform very, very well, and it'll continue to perform very, very well if you treat it the way that you should treat, this type of tool. So, but anyways, I know the vast majority of people who watch my reviews know this, right? So I'm speaking to a very small percentage of people. But anyways, yeah, the experience I had cutting with it, which was minimal, but it's the same experience that I've, grown fond of. I don't love Spyderco knives for their looks. I like them for their convenience and their utility. They work really, really well. And it's just, these are such awesome tools to deploy and use and then put away, and there's very little fuss, right? Of course, you can do the fun reverse flick and the Spidey drop and all the fancy, Larry from Parts bullcrap. But yeah, you can do all that, but, at the end of the day, they're just a really good tool. I especially like the choke up spot complementing the thumb position on the ramp back here. And I also like Spyderco's jimping. It is aggressive, but it does a good job of locking you in. These are not knives that you're going to drop. Where it is uncomfortable is the same place that the PM2 and the Para 3 is uncomfortable. It's just these edges are just sudden drop-offs, right? These knives would benefit from an overhaul with the chamfering right here, and ideally contouring. Spyderco's probably never going to give that to us on these American knives, right? This is an American Spyderco made in Golden, Colorado. They have, they have Chinese, Spyderco plants. They've got ones in Italy, in Japan, right? All over the place. This is USA, Golden, Colorado Spyderco. So, but yeah, definitely a good lock-in, very comfortable, and very much a tool, right? Flat grind, we have a satin finished blade, which is very basic, nothing special going on here. Got a little bit of a goof up back here, which is still just kind of typical of Spyderco. But this area right here, it just makes everybody mad, right? If you hate sharpening choils, then you'll be happy that it's not there, but it always looks like crap from the factory, almost always. If you love sharpening choils, this one doesn't have it, right? So no matter what, it's a little bit of a complaint there. With it not having the sharpening choil there, makes it really easy to choke up and put all the power into that initial cutting edge without it getting hung up on that little spot that would otherwise be a sharpening choil. But again, it just doesn't look good. This knife is destined to look worse and worse over time as you continue to sharpen it, because the cutting bevel gets further and further away from this little lip right here. So that's just going to be the case, right? From the factory, outside of this area right here, the rest of this cutting bevel looks pretty darn even. And Spyderco knives tend to not look that way. I wonder if this one's pretty good, but you can see right here the PM2's got that weird little sort of smile on the back end. It doesn't look so bad from a little bit, I guess. How's the Para 3? It's essentially the same thing, right? It just doesn't look very good. Spyderco CPM S30V, which is one of few compositions that's actually made for knives, if you didn't know. Golden, Colorado, USA Earth, Sal and Eric Glesser signatures or their logos there on the blade. We have a couple of basic standoffs there. Of course, full steel nested liners, the lanyard barrel, yay. Tip up, tip down, right or left-handed carry as a, I don't know if they make left-handed military tools. I know they make left-handed Spyderco PM2s and Para 3s, I believe. I suppose maybe they will. I forgot to look that detail up. But This is a right-handed compression lock. Even if they don't make a left-handed compression lock version of the Military 2, it's still pretty easy to manipulate, as you can see here with my left hand. So you're playing by slightly different rules, essentially. Lockup, very good. No blade play up, down, left, or right. The compression lock is a very strong locking system. Not as strong as something like the Triad lock, the Shark lock, the Super lock, the Scorpion lock, right? Those are going to be superior. But as far as like the spectrum of knife locks and their strength, the compression lock is definitely on the stronger side. Couple that with the incredible ease of manipulation, it just makes it a good balance, right? A little bit of lock stick. There is no blade play in any direction. I think I already said that. We have no pivot lash. Smooth and consistent in here, especially when you lift up on the compression lock, which is going to be the case when you're retracting it or closing it. And then your detent is just really nice. And this guy has stayed... may have come off slightly. I bet turn it on the pivot. When I got this, it was perfectly centered. I think just from using it and, kind of playing with it a little bit here and there, it's just going to come slightly off center. Just need to crank it back or maybe add a little bit of my own blue Loctite. So, as a tool, I like this. I think I would just prefer to carry a PM2 with a shorter clip. Because I don't need this much blade, but some people do, right? Either way, I would switch the clip out. What's the price tag? $210. Is this a $210 knife? Well, it's utilizing S30V. A lot of people think that S30V is old news and it should be a budget steel, and they are wrong. S30V is still very, very expensive. It is still an incredible steel. Like if you stack it up against super steels of today, like 2024, and you balance everything and you don't put edge retention up on an absolute pedestal, right? Because a good blade steel composition will be good for a lot of different things, not just one thing in particular. This is, again, one of few blade steels or blade steel compositions that's actually made for pocket knives. So S30V, not only that, but it's also still expensive, right? People think that it's just cheap, and everybody's just like, oh, yeah, no, we're just like marking the price up. No, you don't see this stuff on budget knives because it's an expensive steel to create. So, yeah. Would S45VN be maybe a better choice, make people happier? I think S45VN has a slightly better balance and definitely has some added corrosion resistance, which is going to be better for a lot of people. It also kind of feels, it kind of like, I get it. S30V is not a new steel and S45VN is, and it just makes us feel a little bit better about spending this type of money on something like a basic pocket knife. So yeah, okay, I kind of get that. Still expensive though. This is made entirely in the United States, save for I think a couple little tiny things, which is very expensive, right? So you can't compare it to a Chinese knife because it's not made in China. That's, again, it's something that people do on a regular basis. They compare it with Chinese knives. It's not made in China, right? So could Spyderco make and sell this knife for $50, as some people will say it should cost, and actually make money? No, they can't. Should it cost $210? Definitely not. In my opinion, a fair price for this knife is probably right around $150, which is the cap of what I think all of those flagship USA Spyderco knives should cost. The PM2, the Para 3, the Military 2, the Mannix 2, the Shaman. I have no idea why any of those cost more than $150, but they all do. So it's just crazy. This really isn't that complicated. It's a couple of pieces of steel, some G10, some washers, S30V blade, but it is made in the United States. It has really good tolerances, and it is heat treated really, really well. Their consistency or their quality control is pretty good with a couple little goof ups here and there. But all in all, it's a good American-made tool. It's just too expensive. So do I recommend this knife? If you love the PM2 and you're like, man, I just wish it was bigger. Well, yeah, this is great. If it's like your favorite knife, it just isn't quite big enough. Yeah, definitely, right? Especially if you're big into Spyderco and USA-made knives. Is this a major competitor at the $200 price mark in the entirety of the knife world? No. It's a good tool. It's made well. It's just not, like, oh my gosh, you should be beating down doors to get one of these things and put it in your pocket. I had a good experience with it. It's a good tool. It's just really expensive. That's it. That's my review of the Spyderco Military 2. That's going to be it today. This will go in my Spyderco Knives playlist, but that'll be it. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.